Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us today on this Start Smart, the Basics webinar. If you have any technical difficulties as you're entering the room, just type there in the chat message and I'll try my best to help you. But sometimes if all else fails, maybe just refreshing the screen will be able to get you back into the session. So we're going to get started. We're going to dive right in because we've got a lot of material to cover. So I want to start by introducing a little video here with some of the best advice to entrepreneurs that I've ever heard. So I hope you enjoyed this. Take a look.
The best advice to a small business owner, or for that matter, to a large business owner, is never stop thinking about how to delight your customer. Not to satisfy your customer, but to delight your customer. And when you wake up in the morning, start thinking about it. During the day, think about it. At night, think about it, and then dream about it. And no company's ever failed that had millions of delighted customers. And you start with them and you get them one at a time.
There's no substitute for hard work. The best time you're ever going to have is when it starts out just you, and it'd be great if it grows into a wonderful, big, profitable company. But you're never going to be happier and more satisfied than you are in the first year or so of getting your business going, because you do every single thing. You sweep up when everybody goes home. You're the first one in. You plug in the coffee pot, so when your people come in, they have hot coffee and can get straight to work. You work through lunch, set an example for them, but there's no substitute for hard work. People say luck, yes, but the harder you work, the luckier you get.
My advice to a small business owner or any entrepreneur would be not to be discouraged if the business you end up with is not the one you started out to pursue, because so often you encounter difficulties, you encounter failures, and the important piece is to learn from each of those very quickly and to pivot and to move on to the idea that works.
Of course, you have to be close to your products, close to your customers, and think about them. That's the most important, but don't forget to think about your business, what your plans are, what you want to do next, how to take your business to the next level. Again, think about being in your business, but think about your business as well.
My best advice is to really work hard to clarify what your purpose is and be able to articulate that, be able to communicate it in a simple sentence. And the reason that's important is as you bring people into your company, I think the most important question you ask them is, why are you here? Why do you want to join this company? And if you hear that purpose back, if you hear that passion around that purpose, it makes everything a whole lot easier. Any skill can be learned and taught, but passion cannot.
Being an entrepreneur can be a roller coaster ride at times. You will have great days, you will have not so great days. You may even from time to time have an awful day. You've got to stay focused and stay level-headed and keep your feet on the ground.
Companies that do well at some level, even though it may not be written down on a piece of paper, need to have kind of a clear strategy of why they're different, why they're adding value, why they're producing something special that customers need and that they're not getting now. So I think if there's a clear sense of strategy and you can get all the people aligned around that, then you get a lot more power than if you're just scrambling and working harder and harder and without that clear direction. So that's my one piece of advice.
All right. So hopefully you found that video very interesting. I know the information that's presented in there, I've always found that to be some phenomenal advice for entrepreneurs. Just considering the source of where it came from, I think tells a lot. One gentleman in particular, I believe it said something to the effect of make sure that you devote time to working on your business and not just in your business. I think that's a challenge that all entrepreneurs face. And that actually is directly from a book that I always very highly recommend to folks who are starting a business called The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber. Basically, it talks a lot about, how are you going to set this business up to be able to run essentially as a franchise or essentially without your direct involvement. How does your business run outside of your making it happen? Great book. But Anyway, so thanks for joining us again. My name is Kevin Norville. I'm the Center Director of the South Central Kentucky Small Business Development Center. And I appreciate you all joining us today on this webinar. We hope that this is a convenient form factor for you to consume this content. And we hope you find this webinar beneficial. We're going to cover a lot of material today. I'll give you a heads up. The material we're going to use, we normally spend an hour and a half at least covering. So we're just going to skim across the top of it to try and get you finished here in an hour, and be very respectful of your time, and hopefully provide you with the high-level overview of information that you might need if you're considering starting a business. I will encourage you and let you know that if this is something you really want to pursue, feel free to follow up with us after this and schedule an appointment where we can sit down and talk with you in more detail. The great thing that you need to know is that SBDC services have already been paid for by your tax dollars, so there's no charge to work with an SBDC consultant. So I invite you to reach back out to us after this webinar if this is something you want to pursue, or maybe you just need more information or have some additional questions. All right, so let's dive in. So today we're going to cover the essentials of starting a business in Kentucky. And so again, like I said, this is a high-level overview. We're going to try and touch on a lot of different topics in the short amount of time that we have. So if you do have questions, I will let you know. You can actually enter those into the chat room, and I'll try and keep an eye on that and monitor those so that I can maybe pull a few questions into the presentation as well. A little bit about SBDC. In case you weren't not familiar with us, is basically the Kentucky Small Business Development Center exists to provide in-depth, hands-on, high-quality consulting services to both entrepreneurs and existing businesses throughout Kentucky. Our organization has been around in Kentucky since the early 80s. We're part of a statewide network, so there's basically 12 centers located throughout the state of Kentucky. And then we're also part of a nationwide network of America's Small Business Development Centers, and there's over 900 SBDCs throughout the United States. A little bit more about me in particular in my center. I'm with the South Central Kentucky SBDC, and I cover 15 counties shown here on the screen. My office is here in London, based at the Kentucky Highlands Innovation Center. And basically, I'm available to work with you on whatever issues you may have. So if you come to us with a particular question or a particular need, our services are really driven based upon your unique needs. So we're going to sit down and try to figure out what it is that you need and how the SBDC can help you. So that's a little bit about us. Our agenda for today, I told you, is jam-packed. We're going to start off by talking about feasibility. So when we look at a business idea, we don't necessarily look at it, is it good or is it bad, but we look at how feasible is it. We're going to talk about the importance of market research so that you can make better informed decisions. We're going to look at the various legal entity options that are available to you as you start a business. We're going to talk a little about how do you register and license that business in the state of Kentucky. We're going to hit on the business plan overview, and then hopefully, like I said, address some of your questions as well. You'll notice one thing that's absent here is really the issue of funding. And so we've taken that topic and actually made a separate webinar for that. So that's coming up later on this month. You'll be getting a notice about it, so you can register if you'd like to attend that. We have one session devoted entirely to funding and how do you get your business financed. So I really like this quote from John McCaffrey. You know, essentially the mechanics of running a business are really not very complicated. You have to make some stuff and sell it to somebody for more than it costs you. There's that and just a few million details. And that's really what I think a lot of people are sort of maybe surprised by or sometimes scared by when they start the process of opening a business, is just how many details there are that you have to start thinking about. So hopefully today we're going to help you, categorize and maybe group together some of those issues so that you can kind of feel better that you've got everything under control as you start your business. So again, is my business idea feasible? That's really the structure that we like to look at an idea when someone comes to us and says, here's my idea for a business. We don't want to say, yeah, that's a great idea, or no, that's a horrible idea. Instead, we want to look at the feasibility of the idea and help you determine how feasible it is. So this is our model that we're going to use. We're going to start with the business idea. We're going to look at it through different lenses, which include personal and business considerations, market considerations, financial. All of those will hopefully guide us to a decision. And that decision will be, yes, this is still an idea worth pursuing. So let's develop a business plan and let's look for funding and try to get this thing off the ground. Or maybe it's not that feasible and we need to reevaluate some things. Hopefully what we've learned as through this feasibility assessment is we've been able to accomplish or incorporate that back into our business idea. So starting off, we're going to look at business and personal considerations. And those are really going to be, as far as on the personal side, those are unique to you. Not everyone will have the same personal considerations to think about. But here's some examples that maybe apply to you, maybe they don't. Are your personality characteristics suited to small business ownership? Certainly there's a certain temperament that entrepreneurs tend to have, or some commonalities in their temperament. Is your personality, compatible with being an entrepreneur? How do you feel about risk? Are you willing to risk most or all of your assets? I know personally, I was much more comfortable with risk at 26 than I am now at 46. So that's something that obviously changes over time. Does your business concept match your lifestyle? If you're the kind of person that likes to spend every weekend at the lake, maybe opening a bakery is not the best idea for you, right? Something that's going to be real labor intensive and you're going to have to get up early every day. Speaking of work ethic, are you willing to work 12 to 16 hours a day? My dad famously says to me, I believe a good entrepreneur should really only have to work half a day at most. He said, it doesn't really matter if that's the first 12 hours or the second 12 hours. So I think that's the key thing, realizing that it's going to take a lot of work. And it's going to take a lot of sacrifice to really get your business off the ground and growing in the way that you want to see it happen. The next issue of family. Does your family support your decision to open this business? That's a big one, because if your family doesn't support it, it's going to cause you some potential other issues that you're going to have to deal with in the business. And you've got enough issues to deal with aside from that, to include family issues on top of that. And then finally, if we've not discouraged you enough, are you prepared to lower your standard of living for several months and or years? And certainly there's a certain measure of sacrifice that comes with being an entrepreneur. And so those personal considerations are just some things that you need to be aware of. Now, again, maybe not all of those affect you or impact you, but certainly something you want to think about. Now, I've got a handout for you, and the way we distribute this handout might be a little bit different. So if you'll notice on the right-hand side of your screen, I'm going to share with you what we call, it's a document that's listed as the traits of entrepreneurs. So I'm going to go ahead and share that file. So now you should see on the right-hand side of your screen a little box that popped up, and it says Traits of Entrepreneurs, and it's a PDF file. You can click on that download button, and then you'll be able to get that file. So I'm going to give you just a minute to download that. But keep in mind too, if you miss it right now, I'll put this up at the end, so you'll have a chance to get it then. The Traits of Entrepreneurs is really a nice little assessment that you can actually walk through that will show you what personality characteristics and how your personality or your skill set matches up to those of what we would consider a successful entrepreneur. So this is a screenshot example of what that little assessment looks like. So that's one share I want to give you, one document I want to give you. And I also want to share another one because we want you to have a vision for your business that is aspirational. So as you're starting to work on this, we found it's very helpful to actually write down some goals in regards to what you want this business to become. Is this just a side hustle that you're going to spend 10 to 15 hours a week, in your free time working? And that's great if it is. But put that down on paper so that you have those goals clear in front of you. Is it something that you intend to replace either a part-time or full-time income? Do you want to quit your job to pursue this venture? If so, write those goals down. So this is the screenshot of the goals sheet and what it looks like. I encourage you to write these down, hang it on your refrigerator, your bathroom mirror, someplace you're going to be looking at this to actually, internalize the main reason, your why that you're wanting to start this business so that it's always in front of you as a reminder. So those are a couple of handouts in regards to, again, personal considerations for starting your business. And again, if you missed those during that sharing, I'll be able to launch those up later on. Now, closely related to personal considerations are a number of business considerations. And this can be really inundating when you start to look at all the different things that could affect your business. So we've listed some of them here. There may be location requirements that you have to deal with in regards to your business. Maybe you're going to open this business in your garage, but you're not zoned for a commercial business enterprise. Maybe you need a location with high traffic and you can't find anything in your price range. There's all sorts of business considerations regarding location that you're going to have to deal with when you look at the feasibility of an idea. Same way, you may have to buy equipment. What sort of equipment do you need to run this business? If it's a manufacturing equipment, if it's a CNC router, if it's something that's going to be really expensive and take a lot of expertise to use, there may be equipment considerations you have to deal with. There's a vast array of legal issues that could affect just about any business, everything from licensing requirements and permits to health and environmental regulations. And there may be specific regulations that just deal with your chosen industry or profession. Not to mention insurance requirements. So all of those things can kind of snowball in regards to legal issues that you may have to look at. Personnel, how many people do you need to actually make this business run? How are you going to hire them? How are you going to train them? How are you going to retain them? All sorts of personnel issues. And then finally, the one we list here is processes. How can you make this business work so that it is actually a system, a process to running the business? It's not just everyone has to come ask you how to handle a specific situation, but rather you've put in processes in place so that everyone who works for you understands this is the way the business runs. So those are some business considerations, and certainly we'd have a much more in-depth discussion based upon what type of business you're looking to start. So now as we move on the graph, we're going to move over to market considerations. And certainly that's a very valid, very important consideration to look at because it tries to answer the question, is there a demand for the product or service that you want to offer? And the one way that we recommend really diving into market considerations is to do your research. Your goal here is just so you don't get surprised later on when you open that business and find out that there's not enough demand for that type of business in your market. So how do you do this? Well, you can do it through a number of different ways. We're going to talk about primary and secondary market research, as well as some other things you can do to determine the demand for your particular product or service. So when you're thinking about market considerations, one of the things that's very helpful to do is to draw up in your mind what your target customer looks like and be extremely specific. Who is that person? Where are they located? What exactly do they want? So get very specific about that target customer. As many details as you can imagine, you want to include in identifying who that target customer is. A lot of times business owners may say, well, I want to sell to anybody. Well, of course you do, but there's also a target customer that really fits what you do well. And so we want to identify that target customer. Your competition. There's direct and indirect competition. What is your competitive advantage? What advantage do you have over other solutions of products or services in the marketplace? What is your niche? What is your unique selling proposition? Those are some things to think about in regards to your business idea. And then the third thing here is industry trends. What is happening at the macro level that's going to affect your individual business at the local level? Is the industry expanding? Is it shrinking? Is it a mature market? Is it a growing market? All of those things are important to know about your particular industry that your business is in. Now, another word here on competition. A lot of times people will come to us and say, well, I don't have any competition. There's nobody doing exactly what I'm going to be doing in this market. Well, there's really always competition, including the competition of not buying just what you're selling. So no matter the business, everybody has options. You want to look at what are those options for the consumer and see how that stacks up against what you're offering. You want to be able to locate your direct competition. You need to know them by name. You need to know where they are, what their strengths and weaknesses are. So get real familiar with who your competitors are, because you're going to have to do business against them. You're going to be competing for customers with them. So you need to know your advantages over what they have to offer. And then again, don't overlook indirect competitors. And specifically here, a good example of a substitute. A day spa may be an indirect competitor to a nail salon, right? So when we talk a little bit more about industry insight, there's a lot of ways you can find industry information at the macro level. Some of them are listed here. Join an industry trade group, attend conferences and trade shows, research your industry. I'm going to hit on that in just a second. Network with other people who are maybe in your industry but are not direct competitors to you. Maybe they're across the country doing something similar, but you can connect to them, reach out, and say, hey, I'm looking at starting the similar type business. We won't be competitors, but can I pick your brain for a few minutes? And obviously join the Chamber of Commerce, as far as local information to what's happening. Now, one of the particular tools that we have access to with the Small Business Development Center is called IBIS World. And it's a database of industry reports on just about any industry that you can imagine. And this information is constantly updated. So even though the screenshot here shows April of 2018, if I were to pull up a new industry report on coffee shops, it's probably going to be April of 2019. So it's usually very current, and always being updated. So if you approach, or if you come to us and let's sit down and talk about your business, one of the things we can share with you is an industry report for your particular type of business. So I want to show you some of the benefits of this report and what it includes. It starts off with the industry at a glance to help you get a big picture of what's happening again at the macro level. Is the industry growing? Is it declining? You can see here that from 2013 to 2018, it grew at 5.9%. They're projecting that it will grow at 0.9% between 2018 and 2023. It's a $48.6 billion billion market, and there's about 48,000 establishments that are considered coffee shops. So some great macro level stuff. Now, what's also very interesting about IBIS World and how they present this information is they've identified 250 different what they call key success factors for any type of business. And then they list what they view to be the most important ones for this particular industry. So for coffee shops, they identify, having a clear market position, having effective cost controls, the ability to franchise operations. Obviously, Starbucks is a key competitor here. Having your products sold at high profile outlets is important. Market research and understanding, knowing what consumer needs, wants, and desires are. And then also access to a multi-skilled and flexible workforce. So those are some of the key success factors they've identified for coffee shops. So again, access to market research. You can find a ton of market research at your local library as well. If you go to your local library and just say, I'm looking for market research on a particular industry, they're going to show you the resources they have available that they can get some of that information to you. And then also I encourage you to reach out to your local SBDC office if one of these reports would be beneficial to you. All right, so then we're going to move on to the financial considerations in regards to feasibility. So again, we're making progress, but we're looking at the numbers. On the financial considerations, we really want to know more about the numbers. Do the numbers add up? Because if the numbers don't add up, it doesn't matter how great that idea is if you're not going to make money doing it. And so what we tend to do is we approach this with a starting point of just asking the client to come up with some estimates. We want to know what you think it's going to cost you to start up your business. So what are those one-time purchases that you need? Maybe it's, a piece of equipment. Maybe you're buying a building. Maybe you're buying a truck or a trailer or whatever it might be. Maybe you're having to pay a deposit down on the lease of the building that you're looking at. Estimate what all of those expenses are. And then we want to include as many of those as we can. Then we want to make a separate list of everything that you think will be your ongoing monthly expenses. So your insurance, your utilities, ongoing expenses that are happening every month. So these are not your one-time things. These are the ones that you're going to have to meet every month that you're open. And then finally, we'll get into a point where we will estimate total sales per month. Now, this is a process that we are happy to sit down and work with you on. Usually as we're developing a business plan, this is an area where it's probably the most difficult for most entrepreneurs to really come up with accurate projections and accurate estimates. So we're happy to sit down with you and work through this, in depth and one-on-one so that we can make sure that your numbers are based somewhere in reality and not just on a hunch of what you think you'll be able to do. So we're going to look at all those different things, including market research, to get an idea of, are these numbers feasible and are they realistic? So let's look at a brief example here of a business startup. And let's say you've identified that you need about 70,000 in equipment, another 10,000 in startup expenses, and 10,000 in inventory. You'd like to have 30,000 in working capital, bringing the total to $120,000. Well, where's that money going to come from? And again, we're not talking about financing today, but I just want to hit on a point that generally nobody's going to fund you 100% of the deal. So if your project is 120,000, usually the most you can expect from a lender, whether that's a bank loan or a CDFI or whomever, would be 80%. They're going to expect you as the entrepreneur to have some skin in the game. They want you personally invested in the business yourself. So any business that you're looking at starting, just realize usually you're going to be expected to contribute about 20% of that project, and and you can generally try to finance the 80%. Where does that money come from? Well, it comes from a variety of places. Personal savings, of course, of the entrepreneur are usually the best source because that's your money and you're investing in yourself. Friends and family would be a close second. If you have friends and family that would like to invest in your business, that's terrific. Debt funding would be a loan. Equity funding tends to be used for businesses that have the ability to scale rapidly. And equity funding is essentially giving up a percentage of your business ownership in exchange for that funding. Grants, I'm going to talk about in just a second because that's always a popular question. And then crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is a relatively new concept, but it's kind of an innovative way to launch a business and get some funding. All right, so here's another handout for you since we're talking about grants. So by far, the most common question we receive is, what grants are available to help me start my business? And so we developed this publication called The Truth About Free Money and Grants. And so you can download this and view it later. It's another PDF. But it talks about the reality when it comes to grants. The true statement that I can come up with is, yes, there are grants available, but they are usually very difficult to find that would fit your particular business. And two, there's normally some strings attached to those grants. So oftentimes you may have to be doing research in exchange for that grant. And so by doing that research, you're agreeing to basically accomplish a certain number of objectives, and you have to report on those objectives. But certainly there are still some grants for that. I know as well, there's also, if you have a business that you're wanting to start that's agriculture related, a lot of times you can find some innovative grants there. They may be small, but it's certainly, anytime you can get free money, it's worth getting. So just keep in mind that for the vast majority of businesses and what we would normally call your Main Street businesses, your retail service type businesses, grants are just not usually a realistic option for funding. So, but you can find more information here in the grants document that I just shared with you. Okay. So as we're still talking about financial considerations, the ultimate question we want to ask is, will my business make money? One of the first things we want to do to help determine that is we want to look at a break-even analysis. And a break-even analysis is a financial concept where we take and you see the formula here, you take your fixed costs and we divide those by the difference between your average price per unit and the average cost per unit in the case of a product-based business. I'm not going to get too in depth here. This is not going to be a math or finance class, but I just want to show you this example and how knowing what your break even is very important to a business. So let's look at this jewelry store example. Let's say you're wanting to turn that jewelry making hobby into an actual business. You have $1,000 per month of fixed costs, which include things like your rent, utilities, equipment. Your variable costs for each necklace that you make are $50 for materials and labor. So you'd like to charge $70 per necklace since that's what similar pieces are selling for in the market. So let's determine that break-even quantity. We take the $1,000 fixed cost and divide that by the difference between what you want to sell it for minus what it costs you to make it. So 70 minus 50. So you get $1,000 divided by $20, which means that you have to sell 50 necklaces a month at $70 each in order to break even. So that's a simple concept. or a simple example. But sometimes determining your break even, is very difficult because you have to identify all of these costs that are associated with your product or service. So that's an area where we're happy to sit down with you and come up with a better example for your particular business, and encourage you to really do that and know those numbers. That's going to be something I've even seen, folks will write that on their calendar in their office. Here's our break even. And so they're checking their sales report every day. Have we reached break even yet? So that they know that they're on track to succeed any given month. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears and talk about legal entity options. And I have to, of course, provide a disclaimer that I'm not an attorney, nor am I a CPA. But basically what we're going to talk about are the various legal options, legal entity options that you have available to you to choose from when you're forming your business. So let's get into some details. So and you've probably heard of many of these, but we're going to talk about sole proprietors, partnerships, C corporations, S corporations, and LLCs. Now, there's other entities as well, but these are the ones that we see most often. A sole proprietor is probably what most people are familiar with when they think about starting a business. Quite simply, it's the easiest to form. Its definition is basically it's a business with one owner. There is no legal distinction between the business and the owner, though. So anything that the owner has is technically available to the business. So basically, there's no real legal protection for a sole proprietor. So that's why we say it has the maximum risk exposure to the owner for potential liabilities. That means if you get involved in a lawsuit and someone's suing the business, they can go after your personal assets as well, which is not good. From a tax perspective, any income for a sole proprietor is passed through to the owner's personal tax form. So that makes it simple. You don't have to pay separate taxes for the entity. And sole proprietors will automatically dissolve upon the death of an owner. So they don't actually maintain beyond the life of that particular owner. We don't see too many sole proprietors on a regular basis. Sometimes you'll see someone start as a sole proprietor, but then they'll quickly move into a more formal legal entity. Now, a partnership, the best way to think of a partnership is it's really a sole proprietor with two owners. It's pretty much treated the same way. It can be formed by two or more people. A general partnership, each of the partners share the liability. A limited partnership, the liability of the partners is limited to the extent of the investment of each. So you can say, well, I'm 60% owner. I have 60% of the liability, 40% owner, and so on. Partnerships are dissolved upon the death or departure of a partner. And if you're going to form a partnership, definitely include a partnership agreement, because doing business with someone, no matter how close they are to you, can present all sorts of challenges. And so what happens when one partner wants out of the business and they want to be compensated for their ownership in the business? How are you going to decide how much to pay that particular partner? Now, all partners are liable for each partner's action as well, with or without consent. So that's one of the downfalls of a partnership. Again, normally don't see too many partnerships, except in the case of when they start out and then they quickly change. Corporations, you really have two types that we're dealing with for most small businesses, either a C Corp or an S Corp. I'll go through some of these. Basically, a C Corp is a separate legal entity. It's required to have articles of incorporation. You can have a single or multi-owner, and there is limited liability provided to the investors. A downside to C Corps is the double taxation. Basically, the corporation has to pay tax, and then any money you take out of the corporation, you have to pay tax on. But it usually is a good vehicle for being able to raise capital through the sale of stock, which for S Corp or for C corporations. S corporations, I learned some accountants refer to as a small corporation, which I didn't realize that until just the other day. So small corporation, you have to file a separate form with the IRS, Form 2553, to elect an S corporation status. A few minor differences here between a C Corp and an S Corp. You're limited to no more than 100 shareholders. They must have U.S. legal residence. Now, the interesting thing about S Corp is income flows to the stockholders, so you don't have that double taxation. So there's a definite tax advantage there for an S Corp. And then again, you also have the limited liability provided to the investors. So corporations, by definition, the main reason for forming a corporation would be liability protection, which means that if you're involved in a lawsuit, Basically, the attorney can go after assets of the corporation, but your personal assets are protected by what is called the corporate veil. So as long as you do not pierce the corporate veil by, let's say, commingling of assets, as long as you keep that intact, then you're going to be protected. So I see quite a few S corporations. I don't see a whole lot of C corps here recently, but just anecdotal evidence. So by far, though, the most common type of legal entity that I work with at the Small Business Development Center are limited liability companies, LLCs, as they're called. LLCs have a lot of flexibility. You can have a single member LLC or a multi-member LLC, and you can see the owners are called members when you talk about LLCs. LLCs don't have to have articles of incorporation, but they do have to have in Kentucky an article of organization, which is a little less restrictive. The example I can give you is if you form a corporation, you actually have to pass a motion to open a bank account. So when you go to open a bank account, they'll say, well, I need a copy of your motion saying you're authorized to open a bank account. LLC, you don't have that same requirement. You do, however, get liability protection, which is basically the main reason for choosing an LLC. So you have the liability protection of a corporation, but you have the pass-through income of a sole proprietorship or partnership. So that's the good thing about LLCs is you don't have to pay, you're not double taxed for an LLC like you would be on a C Corp. So the IRS, when you go to obtain your EIN number for your LLC, the IRS says, okay, you need to tell us how you want to be taxed. By default, if you're a single member LLC, the IRS will treat that for tax purposes as a sole proprietorship. And if there's more than one member in the LLC, the IRS default treatment will be that of a general partnership. But you can choose to have a C Corp or even an S Corp treatment from the IRS. And there's some specific situations where that could be very advantageous to do so. So that is legal entities in a nutshell, a very quick overview of legal entity options. So now we're going to move into how do I operate legally as a business? What is required of you to register your business with the Secretary of State in the state of Kentucky? And what does that process look like? In Kentucky, the Secretary of State is the agency in charge of business registration. And so they've developed the Kentucky One-Stop Business Portal where all entities have to go to register their organization. And so this one-stop portal combines what used to be a number of different paper applications into one online form. And so it expedites the process quite a bit. When you go here to set up an account, you'll start by doing that. Set up your own personal account on the Kentucky Secretary of State's website. And then from there, you will then proceed to register, let's say the example of an LLC. You'll proceed to register your LLC with the Secretary of State. And then you'll have the option, which is probably the best thing to do at the same time, to go ahead and register that LLC with the Kentucky Revenue Cabinet. So two sides, the LLC as an entity gets registered with the Secretary of State and you exist as an LLC. And then it takes you over to the Revenue Cabinet where you can do things such as obtain your sales and use tax number. If you're going to be, let's say, purchasing products wholesale and don't want to have to pay taxes, and you're going to be selling products, you have to collect that sales tax and report it back to the state. So you get that sales and use tax number. You also, through the Revenue Cabinet, will do things like set up your employee withholding accounts. So if you're going to have payroll, if you're actually going to be paying payroll to someone, you'll set up those withholding accounts as well. So everything, though, takes place generally through the Kentucky One-Stop Business Portal, with one exception. As you start the process on the Revenue Cabinet registration, you're actually going to be encouraged to go to get your EIN number, which comes from the IRS. So your EIN, which is your employer identification number, is required to register with the Kentucky Revenue Cabinet. So after the process would go, you'd set up your LLC, jump over to the IRS website, obtain your employer identification number, come back to the Kentucky Revenue Cabinet and finish your application. Now, depending on the type of entity that you're forming, usually the fee associated is $40. And that's what you pay to the Secretary of State as you register your entity. Registering with the Revenue Cabinet does not incur a fee. They're going to get their money later, so they don't charge you to register with the Revenue Cabinet. here's the steps that are outlined on the One Stop portal. I will encourage you and let you know if this is something you're ready to do. Give me a call. I'm happy to walk you through this to make sure that you understand what questions are being asked of you as you register your business. We do this quite frequently. I will say that this website is constantly under development. So as you go to the website one time, it may look a little bit different the next time you get there. So some of these screenshots even may already be outdated, but that's certainly assistance that we're available to provide to you. So if you need help, let's say setting up your single member LLC, give me a call and we can sit down and make sure you're doing that correctly. When you register, let's continue with the example of an LLC. When you register that LLC, again, we mentioned that the LLC does not pay tax itself. Basically, that income passes through to the owner, and then the owner pays tax. But in the state of Kentucky, there is a limited liability entity tax. Now, that amount is $175 per year. And so that's what the Kentucky Revenue Cabinet will charge your entity each year to maintain its status as an active organization in Kentucky. So just be aware of that. There have been issues I've seen where people have, in this case, they started the registration process. They didn't think they got through to the end, but in fact they did. And then they decided not to go forward with the business. And then the next year they get a bill for $175 and they couldn't figure out what happened. So just be sure that when you start that process of registering your LLC, that you're at that point, firmly decided that is what you want to do. So now, one thing to note as well, in regards to an LLC or a corporation for that matter, is these are legal entities that exist beyond the person who may have formed them. So if you want to stop doing business as an LLC or a corporation, you have to dissolve that entity. You can't just say, okay, we're done. You actually have to dissolve that entity with the Secretary of State in Kentucky to let them know that you're no longer an active business. So that's another thing to keep in mind. All right. I'm going to pause for just a moment and give everyone a chance. If you've not had a chance to ask a question, please do so in the chat room. If you're still there, just so I know that you're hearing me and seeing everything okay, just say hi in the chat room, just so I know you're able to hear me and see me. And I'm going to take a quick drink of water while you do that. All right. There we are. Thank you all. So, if you have any questions, feel free to type them there. We'll try and get to them, but we're going to keep plowing ahead and get to some more information here about business planning. So let's say you're committed to forming your entity and you're ready to move forward. A business plan is usually the next step. So it's a business plan, as Dwight D. Eisenhower was fond of saying, plans are useless, but planning is essential. So that's one of the things that we like to encourage people to understand. The outcome of a business plan is not necessarily the plan itself, but it's the process that you've gone through to actually develop that plan. I've got a question. Let me go back to the question. Thank you, Melissa. So Melissa asks, if you're providing services and get 1099s at the end of the year, should you assume you're like a sole proprietor? That's a good question. So I'm assuming what you mean there, if you're providing a service and that company would send you a 1099, I think they would probably want to ask if you are a sole proprietor before they would send you that 1099, but I'm not 100% sure about that. Do you have the answer to that one, Melissa? If so, post that in the comments for me. But that's a good question because you may get that 1099, and that would definitely be a tax issue for you as you start to look at your taxes. So I'll read Melissa's response when I see it. There's a little bit of a delay on my side, so I apologize. So in regards to business planning, I'm going to share with you a sample business plan outline that we often use with clients. That's pretty simple. A business plan doesn't have to be overly complicated. So this business plan outline that we use is relatively straightforward. There's not a lot of fluff here. This is a screenshot of it just to kind of show you what usually we try to produce when we work with clients. And I'll just kind of walk through, starting with basically, the table of contents and then your executive summary. But be cautious there. Make sure you save, you do the executive summary at the end, not at the beginning. But then you start by basically summarizing your general business and general company description, explaining the business, your mission statement, describing the industry, your overview of your products and services, those types of things. Then you get into a little more detailed example of products and services that you're offering. So you explain those in a lot more detail in your business plan. And then when you get to the marketing plan segment, it's more than just your marketing strategy. So it's not just advertising. It's also an analysis of the market. Just as we looked at in the feasibility section, it's, identifying your customer, describing in great detail who your target customer is, providing demographic information that explains their customer characteristics, as well as, the industry and your competition. And then also the flip side of that is how are you going to reach those customers? That's really when it comes into your marketing strategy and your advertising. Then you get into operations, how the business is going to work, where is it located, what equipment do you need, what personnel, processes are involved. You talk about the management, your qualifications, the strengths, job functions of everyone involved. And then we finally get to the part where we look at the numbers and the financial data that usually is included in a business plan. Consists of financial projections. And so again, as I mentioned, it's something we're happy to sit down and work with you on. Usually that includes a cash flow statement, an income statement, and a balance sheet for at least a 3-year period. And in many cases, a lender would want to see that first year broken out by month, just so that we can see if there's any seasonality to your business. And most businesses have some level of seasonality. Certainly a lawn and landscaping business is going to have, some periods where they're very busy and other months where they're not busy at all. So, but every business to some extent has some level of seasonality. So that's why we try to break that down monthly to see if there's a cash flow issue on some of those slower months that might be present. So financial data is critically important. And then finally, the appendix is where you would put any supporting documents, contracts, letters of intent from potential customers, things of that nature. So that's the sample business plan outline. Now, the goal here is basically to go from feasibility into business planning. And so the business plan, just to kind of demystify the business plan, it's really just a document that outlines your goals for the business and how you're going to achieve them. Really good business plans become a roadmap for you as the business owner to use as you actually run your business. You're telling a story and sharing a strategy, because whoever's reading this business plan, whether it's just yourself and your management team, or maybe you are going to a lender, you want to be able to convey your rationale for the business, how you intend to run it, and how you intend to grow. Again, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be really long or even professionally drafted. But it just needs to be as thorough as you can while not being excessive, if that makes sense. Free assistance is available. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute. So when we look at business planning, usually that's where, again, we will sit down with you one-on-one and talk through your specific business plan. So a lot of times we will start with a sample to kind of help people start to think about what sort of things should be included in the business plan. Because usually this is not something you do on a very frequent basis. But this would be an area where we could sit down with you and look at which components are needed and help you figure out, what information is needed for each particular section. Again, as I mentioned, when it comes to the issue of financial projections, again, there's really 3 big ones that most lenders will want to see. That's the income statement, the cash flow statement, balance sheet. Again, 3 years with the first year monthly and the second and third year annualized. Any questions on the business plan that that you might have. I'm just checking the chat room here. Sorry, I have to go to a different screen to look at that. Melissa mentioned, yeah, you were asking that because so many people are in that situation and don't keep track of expenses. Yeah, keeping track of expenses is such a critical, important thing. We see so many business owners that start their business and things take off very quickly, very rapidly. And the last thing they're worried about is keeping track of records. And that really comes back to bite them usually, sooner rather than later. So keeping track of those expenses is just critically important. And we recommend, any accounting system is great. Usually if you're working with an accountant now, they'll almost always say, go with QuickBooks, or even better, QuickBooks Online, because it's going to give you the ability to share that with your accountant so they can actually help correct any entries that may be incorrect, or help you when it comes tax time as well. So let me tell you some next steps as we're drawing to a close here. Next steps that I would encourage you all to do is to schedule an appointment with the SBDC. If this is something you want to pursue further. If you have specific questions that you didn't want to share today in the group, you can feel free to contact me, and we will sit down and go through those questions individually. If your next step is to register your business, you may be at that point ready to go, and you just need some help in getting your business registered and obtaining your sales and use tax permit and revenue accounts and those types of things. We're happy to sit down with you and work on that as well. Also, we'll work with you to develop a plan of action so that based upon your time frame of opening that business, what things do you need to be working on now, and what things maybe you need to put off, or what needs to happen first before you go on to work on, let's say, financing. A business plan, of course, will be critically important whether or not you go for funding, but certainly if you go for funding, then obviously it's going to be required. And then eventually you're going to get to the point where you're ready to open for business. So that's kind of what we encourage with next steps to consider. Basically, I'm available Monday through Friday. And usually what I will do is, if there is a specific time or place where you need to meet, while my office is based in London, I'm rarely here. I'm usually out meeting with folks at their particular location or wherever their business may be. So in those 15 counties. So feel free to reach out, and we can make that connection happen. And if we can't meet physically, we've got technology tools that will allow us to share the screen and meet virtually. So that works out pretty well also. So I'm going to give you one moment to ask any questions, and then I've got one thing I want to share here with you. One thing we encourage everyone to do, if you don't mind, is please let us know what you thought of this webinar so that we can improve it. So the link I just posted in the chat will take you to a survey that will ask you some questions about this particular training. And if you can give us your feedback, that would really be appreciated. I forgot to mention that all of the handouts that we went through today, I actually have those in one large PDF that I'm happy to send to you. So what I'll do is, after the webinar is over, I'll send out a link that contains a link where you can download everything that we just talked about through today's session. So with that, I thank you all very much for your time and attention. I want to play one more video here before we get out, but I'm going to wait just a moment to make sure that no one else has any other questions. But I'm going to come back right after the video, but we'll definitely get done here right at 1 hour time frame. So let's take a look here at a very interesting video that I wanted to share in regards to starting your venture, and if you hate your job. So take a look.
Many more people should be leaving their jobs. Go do your thing. You're gonna die. Is it your mom? Is it society? Is it your partner? Why are you not willing to take one step backwards for a step for the rest of your life? How many people, by show of hands, work in a job and are desperate for their side hustle to become their career? Just raise your hands. So many of you created golden handcuffs for yourself that aren't letting you leave your job because you need to make $130,000 a year now because you wanted 700 more square feet in your apartment, or you wanted a BMW instead of a Toyota. Something I've realized that really kind of caught me off guard is how many people spend more money than they can afford. The fact that 35% of this audience wants their side hustle to be their careers, but the reason they can't is because they can't quit their job because they need their job to pay for to impress people they hate. And so you're not happy because you wanted 2 or 3 things that mean absolutely nothing. Why are you not willing to take 1 step backwards for a step for the rest of your life? The amount of people that have emailed me in the last 6 months, because I've been on this rant lately of trying to get people to move back in with their parents at 30 and 40. You're worried about if you move back in with your parents, or if you're not married with a job at 31. You are not willing to take a step backwards. A step backwards, which then affords you the ability to quit your job and do something else you love or you think you can be good at. Like, whose permission are you looking for to do your thing? Like, who is this person? Is it your mom? Is it society? Is it your partner? Is it the people that are commenting in your social media? Is it something that happened to you when you were 9? If you're pessimistic moms, will be like, see, I told you could never do it. If you can't get over that, then you're stuck. Go do your thing. You're gonna die. It's going to end. Something bad is gonna happen. Something great is gonna happen. But most of all, nothing is gonna happen unless you do something. Please stop looking for permission. Please go do that thing you wanted to do. Ask that person out. Start that company. Quit that job. You can always get another job. How are you not willing to take a step backwards because of other people's opinions and willing to ruin the next 47 years of your life? Take a step backwards to take a step forward for the rest of your life.
All right. I love Gary Vaynerchuk. I realize he's kind of an acquired taste. He's got a great entrepreneurial story, though, if you follow his stuff. But he was very direct, right? You know, do something. You're going to die, right? So I think it's kind of a motivational piece that just emphasizes, you know, the importance of just taking a step. You know, take that first step, whatever it is. Maybe today, attending this video, attending this webinar, where's your first step? And so I congratulate you on that, and I applaud you for it. One more thing I'm going to drop here in the chat so you can have it is the official Start Smart guide that SBDC uses. So this is what, if you want a roadmap that's actually written down and you can print it out and use at your will, then this is it. And if you want a checklist, this is as close as we've got to sharing one with you. So hopefully that you'll find it beneficial as well. But again, my thoughts in regards to closing here is if you have any other questions, I'm available. If there's anything I can do at the SBDC to help you, either in the feasibility analysis piece or in the building your business plan or registering your business stage, wherever you're at, please follow up with me. Please let me know. It's what my job is. It's why I'm here. And so I encourage you to follow up with us and let us know how we can help you. Keep in mind, upcoming webinar later this month. I believe it is on the 25th. That will be about financing your business. So it's kind of the same approach that we're doing today. It'll be a noontime webinar. And then also, if you registered, maybe you joined late or maybe you had to leave early, we'll be sending out a link to the replay of this video as well. That'll come out tomorrow. So I thank you all very much for your time and attention. And if you don't have any other questions, hopefully I will hear from you soon. Hope you all have a great day. God bless.